Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of NTI PodTalk. This is the platform where we talk to people, we interview people both in the NTI community and outside the NTI community. But regardless where they come from, we're always talking about health and nutrition and things that are of interest to those in the NTI community. So today I'm very happy to welcome Julie Ebert from Ebert Farms. Thank you so much for being here, Julie. We're going to talk about your farm and what you do there here in a moment, but I want to thank you and welcome you to the NTI Pod Talk.
Thank you, Diane.
So Ebert Farms is a raw milk dairy locally here in Colorado, just east of Denver. And I have been getting my raw milk from Ebert Farms for more than 10 years, probably, I don't know, more than 10 years at least. So I'm a big fan of Ebert Farms. I've been out to Ebert Farms to visit and have seen your farm and your milking processes. And Julie and I have kept in touch and have a friendly relationship during that whole time. So I really want to talk about you, your farm, why you guys got into doing this. You own the farm with your husband, Kres, and really why you guys wanted to get into the raw milk farming business, because it's not an easy life. And it hasn't been an easy go for many raw milk dairies across the country. It's getting better, but it hasn't been an easy process for many raw milk dairies. And so, those are the kinds of things I want to talk about. Now, before we get started, I just want to point people who are interested in raw milk and interested in the health and nutritional and safety aspects of raw milk. I want to point you to the website realmilk.com. And this website answers all of those questions about health benefits, safety aspects. And there's also a map on that website that is really helpful. It provides all the legal availabilities of raw milk. So for those who don't know, raw milk is not available equally across the country. There are some states where it's available to be purchased retail in stores. Other states where on-farm access to raw milk, on-farm sales is legal. And then Colorado is one of the 9 or 10 states where raw milk is available as herd shares or cow shares. And so I'd like to talk to you, Julie, about that herd share program and how that works here in Colorado. But there are other states that have restrictions, and I believe there's one state that has absolute, all sales and distribution of raw milk is completely prohibited. So each state has their own guidelines about what's legally available. And so why don't we start there? Can you tell us about what the legalities are in Colorado, how you perform as a herd share dairy, we used to call it cow share, and what you know about why there are these restrictions, anything that you can tell us about what you know about why there are the restrictions.
Sure. So initially, raw milk wasn't legal in Colorado. It wasn't illegal either. And David Lynch from Guidestone Farms kind of pioneered the cow share program. He actually kind of got into a scary situation where the health department visited his farm, and he decided he didn't want to continue to live under the risk of wondering if somebody could come in and shut him down at any time. So a lot of people that drank were in the raw milk community at the time. Went and spent a lot of time at hearings and different things so that they could pass a law to make it legal to do raw milk through the cow share program in Colorado. So what that means is each person that gets milk from our farm buys ownership in our herd of cows. And then you pay boarding fees for your cow in lieu of actually buying milk. And there's quite a legal contract that we have people sign, just, basically making them understand that they're taking on the responsibility of drinking raw milk and what it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I guess the reason why there are these different legal environments for raw milk is because there is a sort of an impression, or really quite honestly a misunderstanding, that there are inherent risks to drinking raw milk. And there are inherent risks to consuming lots of different foods,
right.
But raw milk has its own special sort of category in which it's placed about the inherent risks that are possible for drinking raw milk. And so that's why different states have different legal environments that allows people to access raw milk. So when we're talking about raw milk, we're talking about milk that is not pasteurized. But, for sure on your farm, your cows are grass-fed, or another word for that is pastured. So those two words kind of get conflated a little bit. Pasteurized, it's not pasteurized, but the cows are pastured. In other words, they're grass-fed. And I think that's probably the norm, at least for the dairies in Colorado that I'm familiar with. The cows are all grass-fed, they're out on pasture, eating their natural diet, and that conveys some diminishment in risk of pathogens being part of the milk. Am I correct in that statement?
You are correct, yes. And we truly believe from our research, there's a book, Why Grass-Fed is Best by Jo Robinson, and she's done some research and has information in there about what's happening in a cow's digestive system when they're fed high quantities of grain. And it's basically changing the acidity, and it's making it so that those pathogens hit the more acidic environment that we have in our digestive tract, and they can live, because it changes the cow's gut. So in a normal situation where you're feeding the grass and their native diet and their gut is functioning properly, that bacteria should hit our system and not even be able to survive or thrive. So yeah, that's, part of the reason I believe to be pastured is the safety, and at least to be not feeding large quantities of grain to animals.
Yeah. And one thing I remember really vividly still to this day, when I was visiting your farm, and I was asking all kinds of questions, and Kres was there, and he's like, we have this farm, we grow all this grass. Why not just let the cows eat the grass? Why invest? Why pay for all of this grain and other inputs to feed cows when we can just let them go and they eat whatever's there? They eat for free, basically. So, and it's so common sense to just put cows on pasture, but conventional dairies don't do that. Conventional dairies, where they're producing milk that is going to be pasteurized, I can't say with surety that 100% of them feed grain, but many of them do, particularly the larger ones, feed their cows grain. And so anyway.
Yes. A lot of it has to do with actually being able to get enough energy into the cows so that they'll produce enough. So a grass-fed diet, they're not going to produce the way they will on a mixed ration that's carefully formulated. And also, actually, it can be cheaper to feed those types of rations than try to pasture your animals. Land is a huge expense, and you know, obviously, we farm grain in this country, so it's you know, easy and cheap, and yeah.
And I'm sure that there are complications that arise due to the region and where you're growing. I mean, we're in Colorado. Grass does not grow in January.
Yes.
So
sometimes it doesn't grow in July, depending.
So I mean, there are some challenges that you have to overcome in, as you say, getting enough energy for the cows so that they can not only support their bodies, but also produce milk. Adequate amounts of milk. Yeah.
Yes. But interestingly, you know, we've learned through lots of hard lessons over the years that you can't take a grain-fed cow and turn them into a grass-fed animal. Like, there is a genetic piece to this that, if you buy a calf at another farm that's never had grain, you can pretty much expect they'll thrive. But if you buy a cow that's already been eating a lot of grain, they get super skinny. They just can't make the transition to all grass.
Oh, that is so interesting. I never really thought about that.
Yeah. And a lot of people think you have to have that grain piece to be able to get a dairy cow to produce. And we've really found it really has more to do with the genetics of your herd and only having grass-fed animals, buying from other grass-fed farmers, so that you just keep animals that are meant to do that and own and spent their lives and their ancestors' lives in that environment.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. So, pardon me, I have a little bit of a tickle in my throat. Back to specifics of your dairy. So how many cows do you have? How many acres do you have? Kind of those types of details.
Sure. Well, it's always a revolving number of how many cows we're milking. Fall usually becomes our high points. I think Kres said this morning that we're actually milking 32 cows right now, which is a lot. In the early days, I think we started with like 16. But yes, we calve seasonally, and this is definitely our busiest time of the year. So 32 milk cows milking, but then because we have seasons, we have about another 25 to 30 milk cows that are dry. And we, you know, milk half of them calve in the spring, half of them calve in the fall. And so we have highs and lows in our milk supply. But it just is much better for the cows. And we hate calving in January when it's freezing cold. It's really risky for the calves. And during summer, it's hard for the cows to eat enough when they're hot. So it's risky for them. So it just works a lot better. Sorry, that's my dog.
Yeah. So I'm really interested in hearing about how the different seasons affect the milk. Because I know that when I get my milk in the summertime and sort of into the fall, there's like a difference in the flavor, there's a difference in the color. So can you talk about how those different seasons affect the milk? Because I think that's fascinating. I think that's one of the most interesting things about getting milk directly from a dairy is you really get to experience the full range of how the season and the environment affects what the animal is producing.
Yes. Definitely when the grass is growing really fast and really green, I think that's when it can change the most. And sometimes actually protein level of the feed can affect the flavor of the milk. So that can play into it. There's a weed that grows on the farm called kochia that actually makes the milk taste fishy. I have no idea why. So yeah, it's certainly, it's totally based on what they're eating that affects the flavor of the milk. So yeah, usually in the later summer, the grass starts to dry out and it gets more mild. And then in the winter, when we're feeding alfalfa, it's usually pretty sweet. But, you know, sometimes we'll get into some of that higher protein stuff and like, oh, it's tasting a little different. Maybe we need to adjust here.
Yeah.
So yeah, it definitely is their food that's affecting the flavors.
Yeah. And then what affects the amount of cream? Because I know when I go to look for to get the milk at my drop-off site, I always look for jars that have more cream on them because I like to have that higher cream level. What affects that?
You know, honestly, probably the biggest thing that affects that is that the milk is stored in a cooling bulk tank, and it has to be stirred to because the milk is not homogenized and the cream sits on top.
Yeah.
So, and we kind of have to play with it a little. Let the milk level get too low. The thermostat sits lower than the milk, and the milk will freeze in the tank.
Oh.
Stir off. And then, you know, when we have a new person, like a few times we've had people totally milk, and some people will get a jar of skim milk and other people get a jar of cream, and we get lots of emails.
Okay, so
people and the happy cream people.
Yeah, I always thought it was something to do with the diet of the cow, but now that I know it's a sort of a process, not a processing, but a storage individual person factor. That's good to know. So,
which I think honestly, it probably could have a little bit to do with the feed too, but I honestly don't know that I could answer the question on what feeds specifically make it fluctuate.
Yeah, interesting. Well, so how long have you guys been in business? I forgot to ask you that.
16 years.
And why did you even want to go into this business? Like, you know, I know you and I believe Kres both come from farming families. You could have done anything in the realm of farming. What made you want to go into raw dairy?
I still kind of ask myself that question often. You know, as a kid, I can remember standing in the corrals surrounded by goats that we milked and saying, I will never, ever live on a farm. Just, you know, being the young girl and seeing how hard my parents worked and all of that, and manure and all the things that I didn't like. But yeah, I fell in love with the man who wanted to have a farm. So, and I have a business background, so that worked well. I knew that if we did a raw dairy, there would be a lot of a business side to it. So he could do the farming part and the milking cow part, and I could do the business side. So it was a good thing for both of us. But yes, he is a 4th generation farmer, and he actually grew up on the land where we are today. So he just, you know, had this really big passion to be able to keep the farm in his family and to pass it on to our children. And, there's not a lot that you can make work. We looked at other properties. I tried to pencil it out to do beef or farming or whatever. And it's just so hard to buy land. So honestly, our neighbor was leasing this farm because neither of his uncles were here. And we said, you know, you're only using the creek bottom for hunting. How about if we take the pasture and have some cows? And he said, sure. And so he let us use the pasture for free in the early years when we started, before we actually ended up buying out Kres and his family. Yeah, it was just really by how everything worked out. We met David Lynch in a Weston A. Price conference, and he was getting ready to sell his dairy. And it was like, finally, this thing just landed in our lap that worked and penciled out on paper. And yeah, but also, you know, just some magic of having someone willing to let us have land for free, and, you know, another dairy farmer willing to sell his business to us. And we made payments to him and didn't have to finance it through a bank. So yeah, just right place at the right time was a lot of it. Yeah. Nice. Obviously, I grew up in a background of drinking raw milk as a child. And yeah, my parents actually had a Weston A. Price seminar at their farm when I was a kid. So yeah, I just knew that I wanted to be an organic or some other sort of a farm that supported what I valued in terms of food.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why a lot of people come to raw dairy, because they recognize that there are some differences in the way their body responds to raw milk versus conventional pasteurized dairy. So again, I'm going to point our viewers and listeners to the realmilk.com website to talk specifically about health effects. But I know that a lot of people who have intolerances to dairy, that intolerance is much more prevalent in conventional milk than it is in raw dairy. And that's because there are differences in the chemical constituents and the nutritional value and nutritional aspects of raw milk. And one of the things that a lot of people experience, why they choose to avoid dairy, is because of lactose intolerance. And one of the biggest sort of aha moments with raw dairy is that, well, raw dairy has live bacteria that produce lactase, which is the enzyme that digests lactose. And so those who are lactose intolerant oftentimes have a much easier time of tolerating raw dairy. And you know, and a whole realm of other dairy intolerances that people thought that they had because their only experience with dairy was with conventional. And when they switch to raw, they find so many other benefits that they're getting by consuming raw dairy. And so without trying to put you on the spot and be a spokesperson for the nutritional value of raw dairy, can you talk a little bit about what your customers say as the reason why they're trying to access raw milk? Like, what are some of the stories that you've heard?
Sure. Well, let me back up to say, from your previous question, I started off by saying I ask myself that question often, why raw dairy? And the thing that really does keep us going is just we have a fan club and a community that's really supportive. We have changed people's lives for the better. And yeah, when you get those notes of how it helps someone and what it did for their family or their health, you know, it's empowering. It definitely keeps us motivated and encouraged to do what we do. So yeah, I mean, we have customers that have autoimmune diseases are a big one. And a lot of times milk is one of the main staples that they can safely eat and not have trouble with tolerating. We actually have one customer that has several autoimmune issues, and he's had our milk tested at the Mayo Clinic, and it's one of the few things that he has in his diet. And he regularly says, you know, it's what's keeping weight on him and, you know, keeping him going. So yeah, just stories like that. And people that have had cancer and drank the milk while they were going through treatment. And it's just a highly digestible food. So it's really there when people are having gut issues or health issues. It helps them get through.
There's a really good book called The Raw Milk Diet that goes through sort of historically all the doctors and clinics that, you know, over the last 100 or 120 years or something like that, where they prioritized raw milk. And in many cases, raw milk was the only thing that they were using to overcome, you know, many of these insurmountable health conditions. So it is inspiring to know that there is this food out there that a lot of people don't, number one, recognize that it's out there, or number two, because of those mischaracterizations that are put on raw milk by whoever, people
right.
who want to demonize raw milk for whatever reason. I think people don't have been afraid of trying it. And so if someone is willing to, has been avoiding dairy and wants to incorporate dairy back into their diet, I always encourage them, if you can find raw milk, if you can access raw milk, that's probably a good place to start to see how well you can tolerate it. And that was the case for us. We had avoided dairy foods and all animal foods, because we were vegan, for 12 years. And my son, after he was born, never got any kind of dairy foods until he was 4 years old. And we sort of learned about some things and changed our dietary realm in our lives. And we started doing raw milk. Like, we didn't go to conventional dairy and then switch to raw dairy. We started with raw dairy. That was the first thing we introduced into our diet when we started consuming animal foods, was raw milk. And, and from my own personal experience, I can say that it was a blessing to introduce that really beneficial food into our diets that we've had for, more than 10 years now. So,
Yes.
So I have appreciated it. I mentioned that your cows are all grass-fed. Can you talk a little bit more about other practices that you have on the farm? As a raw dairy, can you talk about some of the other practices? Particularly,
Sure.
I'm interested in learning about how often you milk and like what the milking process looks like.
Sure. Well, it's still a revolving work in progress. We actually started working on some regenerative farming this year, planting cover crops and rotating the cows more intensively. All right, I had one of those moments. Go back to the original question for me about the dairy.
Well, just some of your practices that you follow, and particularly I was interested in learning about how often you milk.
Right. So we only milk once a day. Actually, it's been one of the most awesome changes that we've made in our business. We used to bottle feed calves, and it was very labor intense, and you had to do it twice a day. And we were taking milk from the cows and heating it up to go give the calves a bottle. And we were milking twice a day. And then when we made the transition because when we started, they had been fed some grain, just a little. And so we were able to slowly transition them off. And they started to lose condition. Like I was talking about, they got really skinny. So at that point, we realized we needed to start milking once a day. And just to keep the condition on the cows so that we could be a grass-fed dairy. But then as we started learning more and started improving the genetics and, get a few more years down the road and have offspring that were just out of grass-fed animals, we eventually decided to start leaving the cows with their mothers. So they stay with their mothers 24 hours a day from birth until they're 6 weeks old. And then from 6 weeks old on, we separate them just by a fence line during the night, and we milk the cows in the morning and then let the cows out with their mother during the day and then put them back across the fence in the evening. And we wean them somewhere between 6 and 9 months of age, so that they just really get a good, healthy start. And it has made a dramatic difference Our cows produce better because the calves are stimulating milk production, and the calves are healthier when they're ready to become milk cows and they calve and we start milking them. They produce better, they're healthier. One of our big concerns about doing it was we were afraid we would have all these wild cows to teach how to come through the parlor and milk, having not spent any time with them as bottle calves. But they just learn from each other. And sometimes the calves will even walk through the barn with the cows, and they're curious, and we handle them when we put them across the fence. So they're really pretty easy to work with. And then we'll start working them through the barn a few days or a couple weeks before they're going to calve, if they're first calf heifers. So yeah, it's been a pretty smooth transition. And actually, the super friendly bottle calves, when they turned into milk cows, it was almost a nuisance because they were like pets. You couldn't move 1,000-pound pet into a barn. But when the cows have a little bit of leeriness, then it's easier to kind of get them to go where you need to go. And they settle down. And a lot of it has to do with who's milking the cows. Kres has been milking the entire 16 years. I always tell him if I was milking cows after 16 years, we would have sold out by now. But he really loves the cows. He deeply loves animals. He'll give them a scratch every day. And then Miriam as well swears that the cows know their names individually and that she can say their name and they come into the barn. And she too just really, really loves the cows. And yeah, when the cows know that someone's not scared and that they're being cared for, they're just really easy to get along with. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And just to dispel any myths, you guys aren't milking by hand, right?
Correct. No, we have a machine and we milk 3 cows at a time, and it's an enclosed stainless steel pipeline system that pumps directly into a bulk cooling tank.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And so another myth that I want to dispel is that, raw milk dairies are regulated. You have inspectors who come and inspect your processes, your milking, barn storage, all that kind of stuff. So there is pretty intense regulation and oversight on raw milk. Am I correct?
No, you would actually be wrong.
Okay, all right. Well, so help educate me here.
So I think it's probably different state to state, and I think in some states that probably is true. In Colorado, we're only required to register with the health department, and then we'll never hear from them again unless someone gets sick. Gotcha. Or unless they think we've made someone sick. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there's really not any regulation. In the beginning, we started the Raw Milk Association of Colorado to kind of bring in that oversight ourselves so that we could move forward. But you grab a bunch of busy farmers and try to get them to commit to regular meetings, and eventually it just kind of fell away. And so there have been some regulations set forth by a lot of us who were in that initial group on testing, what the limits should be for coliforms in your milk, and a standard plate count, so just a bacterial count of your milk. Yeah, those can help us make sure it's safe. And then we also test for Campylobacter, Listeria, E. coli, and Salmonella. And we do that once a month. It's not it's kind of like Russian roulette. That's being honest. Like, we're not going to catch if there is something in the milk, and I can't say that there's never going to be anything in the milk. Mm-hmm. There's manure. Kres tells people he regularly gets manure in his mouth when he's milking cows. So, which is why we believe that, they need to be healthy. That's keep the milk healthy. They're not going to be shedding that pathogenic bacteria in their manure, and it's not going to get in the milk if your cows are healthy, right, and you're feeding them the proper diet. Right. So I think safety comes a lot back to that. But yeah, it really is on the shareholder to kind of do their research on, what a safe dairy looks like or doesn't look like. Mm-hmm. It's hard for a consumer really to be able to know what they're looking for, even if they do research. But you just definitely want to know that your farmers can handle cows, and that, you know, they have a good relationship and the animals don't seem stressed out when the farmers are around them. That's a big one, because stress is really bad for animals. And then, yeah, you know, you can see in their manure if there's grain or, you know, what's going on there. So, yeah, just, you know, it is a good idea to kind of observe or ask your farmer some questions.
Yeah, well, so what I always tell people who are interested in raw milk, I always tell them, you need to get educated. You need to go to the realmilk.com website, learn about, you know, the health benefits, the possible risks, because they do talk about those. But then that way you develop sort of a vocabulary of questions to ask when you start reaching out to farmers. Because I always tell people, you need to call the farmer, ask them questions. And even if you feel like you're being sort of burdensome in asking all these questions, don't feel that way, because it is, you know, sort of as consumers, it is our responsibility to you know, be educated and make informed decisions about the foods that we choose. So I always tell people, ask questions, and ask questions about what they feed, you know, how often they milk, how they, you know, how they make changes in the diet if certain things happen. I mean, like, these are all different kinds of questions you can ask. And so just by hearing our conversation today could spark some people to think about questions they should ask the raw dairy. And then the other thing I always recommend is ask your raw dairy if you can come out and take a tour. You know, there may be a scheduled time once a month, or you know, on a scheduled basis when they allow people to come to the dairy. You know, don't expect that they're going to say, oh yeah, sure, you can come this afternoon. But if they tell you just flat out, no, you can't come visit the dairy, then in my mind, that's kind of a sign that I want to move on to someone who's more open to me taking the steps that are necessary to inform myself.
Sure.
So those are the recommendations that I give to people.
Yes, which it can be cumbersome to farmers, especially, you know, seasonally when we're super busy. I think there are times when you will get a flat no.
Yeah.
And I think that's, you know, not a forever no. Yeah.
Well, you know, I'd rather get a not right now, but here's when we allow people to come visit, you know, exactly. And it may be 2 months from now.
Right. Yes.
But just to get a flat no, you can never come. We never allow consumers on our farm or on our dairy. I don't know. To me, that closed door reflects something that that doesn't really meet my expectations and my needs.
Right. So it's also, I think you have to get an education about raw milk itself also, so you really understand what you're getting into and what it is. Someone contacted us not very long ago and asked the question, is it safe to drink raw milk? Just that general question. And Kres said, if you don't already know the answer to that question, I do not want you as a customer.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah, do your research. And if you're not fully convinced, then you're not going to be a good customer, and I'm not going to be a good farmer for you.
Right.
Because, yeah, once you really understand what raw milk is, it's a no-brainer, and you'll never want to drink pasteurized milk again. Yeah.
That is very true.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I can't think of any other questions I want to ask. Is there anything you'd like to add to the conversation that we haven't talked about?
Well, I can't really think of anything, just.
Okay. All right. That's fine. That's fine. So where can people find out about Ebert Farm?
Yeah, the best place is our website, ebertfarms.com. So it's E-B as in boy, E-R-T, and then farms with an S.com. There's a lot of information there about milk, raw milk in general, about our distribution points, about how to sign up. We do currently have a wait list. So if you sign up, you have to sign up for the wait list currently. But we suspect to not have a wait list for a lot longer. So people should definitely go ahead and sign up if they're interested. Yeah, we have a Facebook page. It has some fun pictures on it, but I'm terrible about doing social media things. I keep trying to get my teenagers to do it, but you know, it's just another chore. So
Right.
Yeah, so it's fun to check out our Facebook page, but it's certainly not a good way to get in touch with us. Email is definitely the best.
Gotcha.
And you can email directly from the website, or farmers@ebertfarms.com is our email address.
Great. Actually, you did mention something that I would like to just touch on, and that is distribution points. So a lot of people think that they have to drive to the farm to get their milk because they can't buy it in a store. So how am I going to actually get my weekly delivery of milk?
Yes. Yeah, we do have distribution points all over the metro area. We go to Conifer, Longmont, Loveland, Boulder, and then Castle Rock, and every other week we go to Colorado Springs. So we cover a pretty broad area, and most people can find a spot decently close to them.
Yeah. Mine is, well, less than 5 minutes away from my office, but from home, it's like 15-minute drive. So it's pretty easy access. Yeah.
And that kind of goes back to the raw milk understanding too, because some people think 15 minutes is way too far to drive.
Well, that's
if you're committed to raw milk, you'll drive.
That's true. That's very true. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Well, Julie, thank you so much for your time today. This has been an enlightening conversation. Again, I'd like to encourage everyone to look at the realmilk.com website to learn about raw milk, and then reach out to Julie if you're interested in getting raw milk. There are other raw milk dairies in Colorado. I just happen to have chosen Ebert Farm and have been pleased for the entire time that I've been with your farm. The other thing I wanted to mention back on the realmilk.com website is that website also has a resource page where you can click and say where you're located, and then it'll tell you where there is raw dairies in your area. So, and that's for, I believe, the entire United States, including Alaska and Hawaii. So,
yes. And yeah, I agree. That is a challenge for people to find where to get milk, and that is the best way. Also, obviously, Google searches and the internet or Facebook searches. But yes, that is a good way to find.
Yeah,
we certainly don't. You know, if people have a location that's more convenient, like, you know, Larga Vista Ranch is near Pueblo, like, we don't want you to drive to our farm. Like, it makes sense to support your local dairy farmer.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we're only talking about states where you can't buy it in retail stores. I mean, there are actually more than I realized states that now have legal retail sales of raw milk. And so in some states, you may be lucky that you can buy it in the store. But for those where you can't buy it in the store, this is the next best alternative, and one that has worked out fabulously, I think, for Colorado.
Yes, I think so too.
Yeah. All right. Well, once again, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure talking, and you know, enjoy the milking.
Okay.
Right.
Enjoy the milk. Thank you.
Well, we definitely do. All right. Thanks, Julie.
Yes, thank you.
Hey folks, after our conversation between Julie and I, we continued talking and got into a discussion that I think brought up some interesting points that you might find useful as an accompaniment to the full discussion that Julie and I had. So enjoy. Thanks.
And as you said, it's probably different in different states, but how regulation of raw milk is so much more stringent of pasteurized milk, because with pasteurized milk, they're going to pasteurize it. And so they don't really care how much,
right.
you know, what the bacteria content is.
Right.
They're like,
yeah. And I guess what I should have probably said is that even though we're not regulated, like, it is our livelihood, and it is a concern, a huge concern, to make somebody sick. So yeah, obviously raw dairy farmers are going to be pretty careful to make sure that doesn't happen. Yeah. More careful for sure than pasteurized, you know, setting where they don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.